All right, I want to welcome on my next guest. We have Mark Zuckerman, Nationals beat writer for MASNsports.com. Mark, when is baseball coming back?
I wish I had a good answer for you, Zach. I think that everyone hopes that we have a regular season that begins in early July. I think that's where they're planning at the moment. But as we've seen throughout these last couple months, a lot can change in a very short amount of time. So I think they understood that in order to play by July, they need to get the process started now. That's why they're trying to negotiate with the players. They're trying to figure out all the contingencies of how they would pull this off. And then if they get the green light, if all the government officials, health officials say it's okay, I think the hope is that you'd see maybe a 3-week spring training starting in the middle of June, and then hopefully some baseball that starts in July. And if they can do that, and if there's no disruptions along the way, I think they're looking at maybe an 81, 82 game season, and it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. And I think that's the feeling among everyone right now, is they do not want to have to lose an entire season.
So back in March, when they agreed on the sort of the prorated salaries, was that assuming they'd be playing a lot more games than they think they are now?
I'm not sure if they knew how many games they'd be playing. I think they were hoping for more, obviously.
Yeah.
I think that 80 to 82 is sort of the bare minimum.
Yeah.
If they can't do at least that, what's half of a normal season, I'm not sure that everybody feels like that's worth it or that's a real representative season. So, yeah, I think they would have ideally liked to have 100 or even 120. But, no, I think that the way that agreement worked at the time, I think both sides were good with it. But I think here's where the disagreement comes in. The owners and MLB are trying to say that that agreement left open the possibility of renegotiation if they knew they weren't going to have fans in the stands, because that's a huge source of revenue that they won't have. The players are saying, no, hang on, we signed that agreement. You got to stick to it. And I think that's where the hang up is. Hopefully these two sides can find some common ground in there somewhere, because I'm not taking sides in this. In the end, if the health and safety, if everything else is taken care of and they are actually able to play a season, if it doesn't happen because these two sides were fighting over money, that's not going to sit well with a lot of people. So they need to find some kind of common ground there. And I think they all understand that too. They know what a bad look it would be if they can't get that done. And that has long-lasting ramifications even beyond this year. That's something that could hurt baseball well into the future. So I hope, fingers crossed, that they are able to resolve that issue before they start out.
What do you think is a fair middle ground where the owners are giving something the players want and vice versa?
Yeah, I'm not good enough with the numbers to know, should it be 40%, 45, 5%? I don't know. And part of the problem here is that the players are saying, well, then owners, you got to open up your books and we need to see.
And they won't do that.
And the owners are not going to do that because that opens themselves up to all kinds of other stuff. So, maybe the answer here is, to stick with the prorated portion, minus a certain amount, but then maybe the owners can give the players something that helps them down the road. Even before any of this happened, we were gearing up for a labor fight a year from now when the CBA is up in 2021. So maybe they can kind of start to work on something now, or maybe the two sides can help each other out with something that maybe they'd be looking for in that next CBA to resolve some of these issues. But obviously everybody involved is going to lose money from this when you're playing only half a season and there's no fans in the stands. Yeah, you're going to lose money. And it's just a matter of trying to figure out what's the fairest way to figure out who loses the most. And the thing I hope that they all take into consideration, and again, not that we should be asking these guys to take far less than they deserve. They're the ones putting themselves at risk. But the less baseball there is, especially without fans, there are so many other people that are around the sport that get hurt by this financially a lot worse than the players will be. All the team employees, all the TV network people, the broadcast, the crews that cover these games and haven't been able to do so. The groundskeepers, the stadium workers. There's so many people involved in that are really going to be hurt if there's no baseball. And even if there is, they're going to be hurt because they're not making nearly as much as they would have. So I hope that the owners and players think about all of that as they try to find some common ground here.
Were you surprised to hear guys like Blake Snell, Bryce Harper, and Nolan Arenado speaking out rather than some of the guys that aren't making significantly that much money?
No, because I think the way that baseball is structured, unfortunately, probably all of professional sports are structured, the big money guys
Yeah.
probably feel more security and can get out and speak, and the lesser guys who maybe don't have the experience or don't have the big bucks yet are
Yeah.
probably more afraid to speak out.
Interesting.
And here's another part of all this that I've been trying to tell people too. We tend to think of the players as this one entity, and they're not. This is 1,200 individuals, and they're all at different stages of their career. They all come from different backgrounds. They all have different priorities. You know, the priorities of a 32-year-old who's already made his big money and he's got a family at home that he's worried about, it's going to be far different than the 27-year-old
Yep.
who's just making a name for himself and trying to get a big contract.
Yep.
And that can be completely different from the guy who is trying to hang on and hopes to make the big leagues, but doesn't even know if he's going to be in the big leagues this year. So how they find consensus from all that, I don't know. But I hope that we hear from all of them, and I hope that they ultimately represent what the majority of all of those players feel, because just a handful of guys, especially the big money guys, are not really representative of most players. I think the vast majority of players, number one, really want to play,
Yeah.
and number two, understand that they're going to have to be concessions made. This is not going to be a typical season by any stretch of the imagination, and that it's not worth blowing it all up over those money issues.
Do you think that there will be a fair number of players that, regardless of what happens, based on either their pre-existing conditions or of their loved ones, that just say, I'm not playing this year?
Well, yeah, that's the other issue here. And you heard Rob Manfred say that they aren't going to force anyone to play if they don't want to. Now, he didn't get into the details of, do you still get paid
There's
if you
no
choose
way.
not to get
There's no way.
not to play? And I'm assuming that the answer to that would be no. But yeah, I don't think the players are as much worried about their own health and safety. There are some who do have some existing conditions. You know, Carlos Carrasco missed time last year because of cancer. That puts him obviously more at risk. There are some guys who play with diabetes and other things. So there's that. I think the concern is more about their family members. And, you know, if this happens where they are playing in their normal, you know, home cities and then traveling a limited amount to only their part of the country, you're still exposing yourself to a lot of others. And then you're coming home at the end of the night to your family. So I think those are the biggest concerns they have. And, you know, the ones who do have families, I'm sure we need to take into consideration what the wives feel about this.
Because I know Sean Doolittle's wife is one of them that does have pre-existing conditions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, you know, you hope again that all of them are taking consideration. And you don't want any player to feel pressure to have to just go along with the group. If there's anyone for any reason that feels like this is not worth doing, then they need to have the right to be able to say, no, I'm not comfortable doing that.
Yeah, and then like guys like Trout, whose wives are expecting, that's a whole other thing. Like out of 1,200 guys, imagine how many guys are expecting their children in the next few months. That's probably a fair number.
Right. So, Ryan Zimmerman's wife is supposed to give birth here in June. And he even raised the good point that let's say he goes off and starts playing with them, and then he gets called home because his wife is going into labor. She has the baby. Typically, paternity leave is 3 days.
Okay.
Well, are they going to have to do a 2-week quarantine if that happens? You know, what's the protocol for that? And then the really big question, I know it's on everybody's mind, is what happens when? And I say when, not if, because I think everyone understands that it's probably going to happen. When somebody tests positive. Do they shut everything down? Do they just set that one person aside? Do they set that team aside? How do you do this? And this is where baseball is in a really precarious position. In all likelihood, if they play, they're going to be first up before any of the other sports. And they're going to be the guinea pigs for this. And that could be a great benefit to them if it works. But it's also a huge risk if something goes wrong, if they have to shut it down, if a lot of people get infected, God forbid if anybody dies as a result of it. So these are real stakes here. You know, this is not just a simple, oh, we're just trying to play baseball. There's a lot of real world stakes here, and they have to all understand the gravity of this.
Are they focusing on a lot on what's going on with the Korean baseball league? I've been watching. It's fantastic. I might get a Wyverns jersey, but they're kind of setting the standard of how to sort of resume. Do you think they're taking that into consideration?
Yeah, I think it's no coincidence that you started to hear the MLB plans come out, you know, within a week or two after the Korean League started. They are kind of using that as a guide. Now, the difference is the state of South Korea as a whole is very different right now than the state of America. And so that's something they have to take into consideration. On top of that, that league, I'm pretty sure everybody is able to travel by bus. They don't have to fly
Interesting.
anywhere. So that's a different issue. But yeah, it does give hope. Obviously, every
Yeah.
single little thing out there, whether it's the German soccer league, whether it's even NASCAR and the PGA Tour that are starting up a few things here and there, that all helps. But baseball, if this goes through the way that they're talking about, really is going to be the guinea pig. And I would not be surprised once it starts and if everybody sees it works, if you start to see all these other leagues say, okay, it can be done, here's how we do it. Or if there's problems, everyone say, nope, hang on, we're not even going to attempt to do that. We don't want to be in that situation.
Speaking specifically about the Nationals, which of the international guys do you know are home that when they do come back, maybe there is a quarantining period? That's another 2 weeks to take into consideration.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Dominican players are all at home. So Juan Soto, Victor Robles in particular. The Venezuelans, from what I've been told, are the ones that were, for the most part, I don't know if it's 100% of them, but most of them were kept in West Palm Beach.
Interesting.
The feeling was that was a safer situation for them, and so they've been staying in a hotel, and the team's been taking care of them throughout. But yeah, you're right in that, and another reason why this can't just be fly by the seat of your pants. It can't just be all of a sudden, okay, we're ready to go, let's start tomorrow. There needs to be enough planning time for these guys, for, like you said, the ones who are out of the country to come back in and do what they need to do. And really just for all the players who've been trying to keep themselves in shape, but there's only so much they can do, to start ramping themselves up again so that when they get started, because you're talking about a 3-week spring training, half the normal time. So it's going to be a rush job, and guys want to feel like they have as much opportunity to prepare as possible because they don't want to risk injury on top of everything else going on.
The one thing I've been thinking about that I really haven't been hearing come up, maybe they're just waiting for it to happen, is what about trades? The player gets traded, there's definitely going to be a 2-week incubation period. And then if maybe the player does positive, would there be something in the contract that they could rescind it? Is there anything about that? I've been thinking about that.
No, it's a great point. It's something I've thought about too. You have transactions throughout the course of a season. During this time, everything's frozen. They're not allowed to make any moves.
Yeah.
There does seem to be an understanding that when they begin, that the rosters will be expanded so that you can have more than the 26 that they were allowed this year, plus maybe even a taxi squad of minor leaguers who'd be called up because, again, there's not going to be a minor league season.
No.
It's not like you can just call up guys from AAA. So when somebody gets hurt, you have guys available. But during the course of the season, needs arise. Teams figure that, hey, we need this, we need that. The Nationals have certainly done plenty of that over the years. What's the mechanism for it? I don't know. I haven't seen that outlined anywhere.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be shocked if MLB says, no, whatever your big league roster and taxi squad is, that's got to be your team for the season.
Interesting.
It's not an ideal scenario.
No.
It certainly rewards the team to have more depth than others, but you never know what might happen. A guy suffers a big injury and all of a sudden you're missing your ace or your cleanup hitter or something like that. In the interest of public safety, they may have to do that. Or, and I'm just throwing something out here that just occurred to me, if the idea here is that only the East teams play the East teams, the Central, West, maybe you're allowed to make a trade, but only within your own region.
That'd be wild. But wouldn't they want to not trade within their region? Like, that's the thing. Like the Redskins, you're never trading with the Giants, Cowboys, or Eagles. You see them twice a year. So like that's interesting. And then even though there's not going to be a minor league season, they call up minor league players all the time. So even though they're not obligated to be playing, do they have to be here ready if that time comes?
Yeah, I think what would happen is they'd be there and actually working out with the team every game, and then just not dressing for the game, essentially. The only other option would be to have them like at the spring training facility, but then you're talking about commercial flights they have to take. So no, I think, you could be talking about as many as 40 or 50 players who are all gathered in DC and work out with the team, and then are just, healthy scratches, I guess is one way to put it, so that they could be, available.
You put one in each section.
I think you are going to see some players in the stands. Actually, I do, in order to help social distancing.
Nosebleeds. You can have them.
Hopefully, they don't do that to them. But I think you are going to see players sitting in the stands, and just we haven't even talked about what is the scene going to be like in an empty stadium with no crowd. You're going to hear everything these guys are saying, which can be fascinating, but also might be a little dangerous if they don't want people hearing everything they're saying. There's so much about this that logistically it's hard to wrap your head around. And I'm not sure anybody really truly knows what it's going to look or sound like.
They could keep Carter Keeper at the bullpen just in case anybody gets thirsty, and you can bring him. You can bring stuff left and right. No, but it's weird. And then just speaking. So hypothetically, when baseball does return, Nats are of course world reigning champions. How do you see this season going about?
Well, if this was a normal season, I would say, I think they're pretty well positioned to contend again. But I think one of the big concerns going into spring training was, well, what was the short layoff? What's the effect of that going to be, especially on the pitching staff, those guys who did as much as they did? Can they stay healthy through a whole season? Again, so in a weird way, this could benefit them. Having the extra time off now, we're not as much worried about Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg and Patrick Corbin's arms. You're only going to be asking maybe 16 starts out of them instead of 32.
Yeah.
I think the veteran hitters like Ryan Zimmerman, Howie Kendrick, guys who Davey really had to manage and make sure he wasn't playing them too much.
Yeah.
Well, now they have had some more time off, so you're not asking for as much out of them. And the universal DH, which I'm not a fan of, but if it happens, and I think everyone agrees it will happen, I think that's going to benefit the Nats as well, because now you can have guys like Zimmerman, Kendrick, Cabrera in the lineup, even if they're not in the field. So you sort of get a pseudo day off, but still have their bat in the lineup. The results of this season are not going to – you can't really look at them the same way you look at any other because of these dramatic circumstances of it. So it'll be fascinating to see, does it play out the way you would normally think? Are the teams that we think of as the best teams actually going to be the best in a shortened season like that? Maybe, maybe not. But on paper, it looks like it might benefit the Nats. Like they might actually be in a good position. They have starting pitching depth, certainly would help them. But I don't know. Could this be a bizarre season where
the Orioles win the whole thing?
Orioles Pirates World Series. I mean,
sign me up. I'm good. No, yeah, but and then with the pitchers, since would they isolate the pitchers from the rest of the team just in case somebody on the team does test positive, just so because the pitchers, because you need them when the spot starts?
Yeah, that's a good question too. By all accounts, it sounds like they're not necessarily isolating members of the team. Now, that they are going to be encouraging them not to be in close quarters all the time. Sense. Something you may see, which is kind of going back to Little League and high school days, is they may be asking guys to wait to go home and then shower after a game. You'll probably have boxed meals in the clubhouse instead of the big prepared buffets that they would eat, things like that. And I do think you're going to see within the dugout, you're going to see fewer people there. You're going to see people spread out among the stands, but there's only so much you can do. And if a team is traveling on the road, maybe they leave a few guys behind who they know are not appearing in that series. But I think they're mostly going to have to. And this is the risk of it all. There's a lot of steps they can take, and I applaud them for being so thorough in their preparation for this. But there is still a risk, and it's impossible to completely keep everyone 100% safe, short of not playing and having everybody stay at home. So if they're going to go through with this, there is going to be some risk, and that's why I think everybody is really curious to know what is the procedure, if and when something does happen and somebody tests positive.
How do you think they're going to figure out the whole service years debacle?
So that, I think the union is adamant that they agreed to getting a full year of service time. And I think MLB, understanding all the other issues that are going on, may just have to concede that point. Maybe that can be the olive branch that comes from the league, that maybe lets the players accept a little less money. Okay, you get less money, but you know what? You get your full year of service time. Because, what are they going to do to Mookie Betts? Say, no, actually, you can't be a free agent next winter.
No, not going to happen.
So I think that you will see that, and that's going to benefit a lot of players, not just the free agents, but the guys who then will become arbitration eligible as a result. The guys who, the interesting question here would be, if they have this taxi squad, or if you have an expanded roster, do they all get service time?
Interesting.
Or do the guys who are not officially on the roster not get credit for those days? Again, this could be an olive branch that MLB extends to say, you know what, everybody gets service time in exchange for some other concession that the players are making.
So is the thought that there's going to be no All-Star Weekend this year?
I think probably both for, time purposes. You don't want to lose any of these dates they have. But then also, if they really are committed to only playing within your own region, then I don't see how all of a sudden you say, okay, we're going to get everybody together for 3 days in LA or wherever it might be to do that. So
you could have a bunch of All-Star,
three separate All-Star games, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I would think they bag that. And then also, one of the other parts of this proposal is for an expanded wild card format.
Interesting.
They've talked about. So instead of just the 2 teams in one wild card game, there would be, I believe, 2 additional teams per league. And you'd end up with 3 best of 3 wild card series.
Works for me.
And the number 1 seed from the whole league would get a bye all the way to the division series. So basically 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5. They'd each play a 3-game series, and then the winners and the number 1 seed would advance to a division series. I think there's also an understanding there that, in 82 games, maybe the best team doesn't emerge in 82 games. And think about last year for the Nationals. If they only played the first 82 games of the season, I don't think they make the playoffs.
No. That's wild. That's
they went on to win the World Series. And something I looked back on a while ago was the strike-shortened season of 1981. The strike was in the middle of the season, and they wound up having to have a split season, the first half champion, the second half champion. And I think the total number of games played was like 105, 106, something like that. But what actually wound up happening is that you had teams that won their division in one half or the other. But if you took the total season records, they wouldn't have made it.
Interesting.
And so you would even have like a team, maybe I forget who it was now, but the team that maybe had the best record over a full season didn't even qualify for the playoffs.
That's bizarre.
So I think with all those kind of crazy things in mind, that's why you have to at least say, okay, we have to consider an expanded playoffs here, because over 82 games, the best of the best may not actually prove to be true.
And then, so what do you think is the absolute latest they can hit the ground running on this? When they could say, okay, let's get going. What do you think if the negotiations carry on and we hit July 4th and they still haven't started the training yet, are you going to feel a lot more pessimistic about the season?
I am. That's pushing it. Unless they're willing to play into November, which is a possibility, although then you're talking about having to move games to a neutral site, a warm weather site somewhere. And I don't think they're going to want to do much fewer than 80 games. So if you push back the start of the season, I think they have to push back the end of the season. So maybe they can get by if they were to start spring training like July 1st and start a season July 20th in that range, play into November a little bit, maybe have a few more double headers, something like that. But I think that's about as far as they can go. And so that's why I really think June 1st is an important date for them to have an agreement. And then it's all up to the state of the country and is it ready for things to go? If it's not, then you have to start pushing things back. But what you don't want is for everybody to get the green light to proceed, but then the league and the union haven't agreed on it.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's a good thing that they've been talking already, trying to get this done, and hopefully they recognize that the clock is ticking. And if you can, by around June 1st or a few days afterwards, have an agreement in place, now they can say, okay, everybody, pitchers and catchers report June 10th, gives people time to get set up, get their family situated, relocate to where they're going to be going and get started. I think that's the best case scenario. We hope it happens, but there's really, even at this point, no way to know if for sure it will happen.
What if they do 35 games and then single elimination all the way to the World Series?
I mean, I've seen some crazy proposals. I've seen things like just do the round robin tournament and whoever, emerges from that Royal Rumble gets to be the champion.
It'd be amazing. It'd be amazing ratings. Because it could be like the March Madness we didn't have. You just do it with that, just single elimination all the way up to the top, and then it should be like must-see TV every game.
Sure, and that's why I do think you're seeing everyone is very open-minded to this, and they're willing to do things they would never consider before for the sake of having some kind of season. And you're right, the ratings are going to be big. That's a huge motivator of all this, especially when there's no fans in the stands. But I think there are things they could do to have a special, playoff or round robin or weird kind of season, and they may have to consider that as a fallback. But to me, the fewest number of games you can play and say, hey, this is a real legitimate season that we can look back on and say, okay, that was a real season, I think is about 80 games.
Interesting. Well, this has been awesome. Really, really interesting. For people that don't already follow you on social media, how can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Mark Zuckerman, and that's man, not Berg. Too many people get confused with that one. Remember, he runs that other platform. He's not on Facebook. So Mark Zuckerman on Twitter, online at masnsports.com. Read all the articles, and hopefully I have a lot of baseball to write about soon, because I have just about run out of ideas. I've been coming up with stories for the last 2 months. I'm about out of ideas. So I'm really hoping, as long as it's safe, really hoping that there is actual baseball to write about here soon.
How many Facebook tweets do you get a day?
I'd say on average about 2 or 3. Sometimes it can balloon when he's in the news. It happens from time to time. A lot of them I don't share just because it's too much, or some of them I just get tagged in things that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But, usually my rule of thumb is if I can come up with a funny response in like 5 seconds, then I'll put it out there.
What's the most? What's their record for one day?
Oh, I had like over 100. The day that he testified before Congress, I was completely inundated with it, and I decided, I might as well just embrace this.
Yeah.
Have fun with it.
You ever thought about changing your picture to his just to throw everybody off?
No. And the first words in my Twitter profile are, "I did not invent Facebook," and that still doesn't make people realize that.
Yeah. I invented Instagram. But yeah, no, this has been awesome, man. Thank you so much for chatting for a minute. Hope we can get baseball back soon. I think baseball, space it out. They can agree on all the financials and get everything up in place. Hopefully they can get that to be a good distraction for everybody, especially what's going on in the world right now.
That would be great, Zach. I hope it's true.